The night Elena went into labor, the city outside pulsed with lights and noise, but inside the hospital, time seemed to slow. She gripped the edge of the bed, her breaths sharp and uneven, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone could hear. She had dreamed of this moment for months, imagined the warmth of her partner's hand in hers, the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. But the space beside her was empty, and the silence where encouragement should have been told her everything she needed to know. Alexander Grant, the man who had once sworn he loved her, who had promised her the world, was not there to see his children take their first breaths. He was gone, consumed by fear of responsibility and blinded by ambition. When the cries of 3 tiny infants filled the room, Elena's exhaustion was replaced by awe. She looked down at their delicate faces, 3 miracles, 3 reasons to keep breathing even when her heart ached. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not only from the pain of delivery but from the sharp sting of abandonment. She knew in that moment that she could not rely on anyone but herself. Alexander had walked away, leaving wealth but not love, comfort but not presence. What he didn't understand was that no amount of money could replace the power of a mother's embrace or the unbreakable bond that forms in the very first hours of life. Elena cradled the newborns against her chest, her voice trembling as she whispered a promise meant for their ears alone. "You may not have the world he built, but you will have all of me. And one day, when he sees the strength you carry in your hearts, he will realize what he lost." In that dim hospital room, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, the seeds of resilience were planted. The story of survival and redemption was only beginning, and the world outside had no idea that 3 small lives had just changed the course of everything. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet Elena never allowed the shadows of abandonment to break her spirit. Each morning began before sunrise, with her rocking one baby in her arms while the other 2 rested nearby, tiny breaths filling the silence of their modest home. Life was exhausting, yes, but she found strength in places she never thought existed. When one cried, she sang softly. When another needed warmth, she wrapped them tighter. When all 3 demanded her at once, she somehow managed to be everything they needed. Her love became their shield, her sacrifices their invisible armor. Though her body was tired and her heart carried the weight of loneliness, the glow in her children's eyes reminded her she was never truly alone. While Elena stitched together survival with late nights and countless sacrifices, Alexander lived in a different world. His name filled magazines, his face flashed across television screens, and his company dominated headlines. The world saw him as untouchable, a visionary who had built an empire from nothing. But Elena knew the truth, that his empire stood on a foundation of silence, a silence that had cost him the most precious gift of all. Every time she looked at her children, each with a spark of determination shining in their eyes, she whispered lessons of courage and kindness. She told them stories of perseverance, of rising when the world tried to push you down, of finding light even in the darkest places. What she didn't realize was that she was shaping them into reflections of the love and strength she carried inside her. And somewhere, far away in his glass tower of power and wealth, Alexander sat in boardrooms surrounded by people who praised him. Yet he could not escape the emptiness that trailed him like a shadow. He didn't know it yet, but the same children he had turned away from were already growing into the very force that would one day confront the silence in his soul. Years passed, and Alexander's name became a symbol of success. The world admired his sharp mind, his bold decisions, his ability to turn failing companies into empires of gold. Cameras flashed wherever he went, interviews painted him as a genius, and his calendar overflowed with meetings, deals, and power. Yet when the lights dimmed and the doors of his penthouse closed, he was surrounded not by laughter or love, but by silence that grew heavier with every year. His wealth could buy him comfort, but not companionship. His victories filled headlines, but not the empty spaces of his heart. He told himself he had chosen freedom, but in the quiet hours of the night, he wondered if freedom was simply another word for loneliness. In another corner of the city, Elena raised her children with a resilience that turned struggle into triumph. The triplets were no longer tiny infants. They were lively souls with questions, dreams, and unshakable bonds. They laughed together, argued together, and comforted each other in ways only siblings could. Elena often sat back and marveled at how far they had come. Every sacrifice she made, every sleepless night, had carved out the strong, compassionate spirits they carried. They were proof that love could grow stronger in the absence of wealth, that hope could be built even on fractured ground. But destiny has a way of weaving paths meant to cross again. As Alexander tightened the walls around his life, cracks began to appear. Business partners he trusted whispered behind his back, competitors plotted against him, and an unease he couldn't name started to gnaw at his certainty. His fortress of success, once unshakable, now trembled beneath the weight of unseen storms. What he didn't know was that his past, the very chapter he had buried, was waiting to return, not with anger, but with 3 small voices that would echo louder than any boardroom applause. The morning began like any other in Alexander's carefully constructed life. His alarm chimed at 5, the city skyline glowed in soft dawn light, and his assistant had already laid out his schedule with precision. Meetings, interviews, negotiations, every hour accounted for. He thrived on control, on the flawless rhythm of days that never strayed from his design. Yet beneath the surface of this perfection, a strange heaviness followed him. He brushed it off as fatigue, but the truth was far more dangerous. His fortress was about to crumble. On the drive to a crucial board meeting, the car hummed smoothly along wet streets until a sudden jolt shattered his calm. Tires screeched, metal groaned, and the world spun into chaos. In a single heartbeat, the certainty he had built his life upon was ripped away. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in his luxury car, but staring at the sterile ceiling of a hospital room. Machines beeped steadily at his side, his body weak, his ribs aching with every shallow breath. For the first time in decades, there was no assistant rushing in with updates, no colleague checking in, no familiar voice to ease the fear creeping into his chest. He was utterly alone. The silence that once comforted him now pressed against him like a suffocating weight. As days blurred together, he realized how empty his world truly was. Not a single friend, not a single family member, not a single soul had come to see him. Wealth had bought him power, but it had also bought him isolation. And then, on an afternoon when the loneliness felt unbearable, the hospital door creaked open. 3 small figures stood in the doorway, their wide eyes filled with curiosity and something deeper, something familiar. They clutched drawings in their tiny hands, their voices soft but steady as they whispered a single word that pierced through every wall he had built. Father. Alexander's breath caught as he stared at the children in the doorway. For years he had told himself they were shadows, distant memories he could bury under contracts and headlines. But here they were, 3 bright souls with his eyes, his features, his very blood woven into their being. Their presence hit harder than the accident itself, shaking him to the core. He wanted to speak, but no words came. His throat tightened, his hands trembled. And for the first time in his life, the man known for confidence and control felt utterly powerless. Behind them, Elena stepped forward, her gaze steady but unreadable. She hadn't come for revenge, nor to demand anything from him. She had come because the children asked, because they deserved the chance to see the man who had chosen absence over love. They wanted to meet you, she said quietly, her voice carrying both strength and sorrow. The triplets hesitated at her side until one of them, braver than the rest, walked closer to his hospital bed and placed a small hand-drawn card on the blanket. The simple picture, a heart, 3 smiling faces, and a man standing beside them, pierced him more deeply than any injury. Alexander's chest ached, not from the accident, but from the weight of regret. He had built an empire, yet lost the only legacy that truly mattered. The children's innocence unsettled him. They did not glare with resentment, nor accuse him with bitterness. Instead, they looked at him with curiosity, as though they still believed he could be more than the man who walked away. That trust broke him. Tears long denied filled his eyes. He reached out a trembling hand, unsure if he had the right to touch the very lives he had abandoned. The moment was fragile, uncertain, but it was also the first crack of light breaking through years of darkness. And in that silence the question lingered. Could he ever earn back what he had thrown away? Days in the hospital stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, Alexander began to see life through different eyes. The triplets returned often, their laughter echoing in the sterile halls, chasing away the loneliness that had once felt like his only companion. They brought drawings, stories from school, and questions so pure they unraveled the layers of coldness he had built around himself. At first he struggled to answer, stumbling over words he had never practiced, words of affection, of apology, of longing. Yet the children in their innocence seemed to accept even his clumsy attempts. They were not asking for perfection. They were offering him something far more powerful, a second chance. Elena watched cautiously from the sidelines, her heart torn between the memories of betrayal and the hope flickering in her children's smiles. She had carried the weight of abandonment alone, but now she saw pieces of the man she once loved, breaking through the hardened shell of Alexander's pride. It wasn't instant and it wasn't easy. He had to prove himself, not with promises or wealth, but with presence. He began showing up, not to boardrooms, but to birthdays, not to shareholders, but to school plays. Slowly the walls he had built started to crumble, brick by brick replaced by something unfamiliar yet deeply needed: family. One evening, years later, Alexander sat on a worn couch in Elena's modest home. The triplets, now older and brimming with dreams, leaned against him, their laughter filling the room. For the first time in his life, he felt rich in a way no empire could provide. He glanced at Elena across the room, their eyes meeting with quiet understanding. They both knew the road behind them was scarred, but the road ahead shimmered with possibility. The man who once believed success meant control had finally discovered the truth. The greatest legacy is love. And as the children's voices rose in joy around him, Alexander realized that his story was no longer one of loss, but of redemption.